welcome to the Relational Recovery Podcast. I'm your host, Wes Thompson, joined by my co-host, Austin Hill. Today, we're talking about focus and distraction, and ultimately how these types of things point us to our need for prayer, and how prayer centers us on what is real and what is good and on God. And so we hope this conversation is helpful, and thanks for listening. Afternoon, Austin.
Hey, Wes, how are you?
Doing pretty good.
That's good.
Today, I want to talk about focus and mental health and spiritual health and meditative prayer, spiritual disciplines, kind of all of it, kind of packed into one. I've mentioned it to you before, but man, it's such a heavy and challenging and good book, but Johann Hari's Stolen Focus. And just realizing, when it comes to social media and big tech and the speed of our culture, the amount of information that we have, there's so much at play right now that's making it really hard for human beings in our society to focus. There's an assault on our attention. And I think that's resulting in a lot of anxiety, and just it's interfering in relationships, and it's exacerbating a lot of problems, I think. And it just reminds me of just the ancient practices that we think of even just in Christian mysticism, and going back to centuries of things like, silence and solitude and meditative scripture reading and meditative prayer, and looking at how Jesus lived his life. I was thinking about John 6:14, where Jesus is like doing ministry. And it says, after the people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, surely this is the prophet who's come into the world. So they thought he was like this Messiah. And then he says in verse 15, Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to a mountain by himself. Jesus had he was just consistently, the reason I bring that up is just this consistent pattern of rest and rejuvenation. And in the midst of a lot, you read a book like Mark in the New Testament, and you see Jesus doing all these activities, and it's easy to think that Jesus is just incredibly busy. Yeah, I'm just reminded that he had a deep, reflective life and prayer life, and obviously society was different back then. They didn't have cars and such, so moving from town to town would have been slower and would have required walking. And so there was a lot of quiet, a lot of downtime. And we live in our society, we're so fast paced and moving such high speed that I think some of the challenges that we face in recovery and some of the challenges that we face with addiction get exacerbated by even just the society that's around us, because, we're inundated on these apps and email and so on. The smartest people in the world are hired by these companies to try to get us to spend as much attention as possible and time as possible on these devices and phones and computers. And I know I sound like an old man right now, but the reality is it's really making mental health, I think, really challenging. And it makes me nervous for my own kids who are going to be raised with this stuff their whole life, because I can remember when these things weren't smartphones didn't exist, and so on and so forth. So I want to talk about focus. I want to talk about prayer. I want to talk about mental health. But I don't know, just that quick setup. Are there any thoughts that come to mind for you?
Yeah. There's that initial list you gave of focus, mental health, spiritual health, kind of like, and then spiritual meditations, whether it's silence, just those spiritual disciplines that we see growth in. And every one of those, like, so we talk about those things because we want to first identify, like, why do those matter to us? And then why should it matter that we improve in them? Like, why does it matter that I have good focus? Why does it matter that I am spiritually healthy? Why does it matter that I am aware of my spiritual health? Why, or my mental health, rather? Why does it matter? And why is it important that I practice spiritual disciplines? What are those all in service to? They are to me, each of those is in service to, I guess, if it's in service to striving after the life that we want. Because if I was better at focus, I'd be closer to, that dream state of my life. If I was more spiritually healthy, I'm doing it because it's getting me closer to God, which helps me get closer to others, love myself in a more like consistent, genuine way, which is an improvement. And then it's like, those are things that I can control. Like, I can put the effort into those to improve my life. And then the second part of what your kind of like setup was these distractions that come in. And what I've been reading a lot about for my own growth is, and I hope someone rolls their eyes at this someday who hears this, is identifies, like, what are the things that I can control? And like, no one ever forces me to turn my phone on. No one ever forces my thumb to go over the Instagram app and push it. That's my choice. And it's realizing how much actual power I do have over what negatively impacts my focus, what negatively impacts my mental health, what negatively impacts my spiritual health, what negatively impacts the amount of time I have in a day. Most of those things are my choice. And really owning that and not blaming. Because I think where we become like, and this is like where you say you don't want to sound like the crotchety old man, but like the stereotypical crotchety old man blames, doesn't take responsibility, just blames everything. Like it's this younger generation or society. It's like, well, bud, like, well, Austin, if I start getting curmudgeonly, it's like, what can I do about that? I can't do really much about like quote unquote society, but I definitely can control and do a lot about my choices that positively or negatively impact the life that I have and its future improvement or destruction. So that's what comes to mind.
Yeah. I like how I like everything you said there. I think it's really interesting how you opened it up. Just why do these things matter? And I want to take a quick stab at that. Why does it matter that like our focus is being deteriorated? Why does it matter that why does prayer and these disciplines matter? Well, what is happening when we do these things? What's happening when we mindlessly scroll, infinite scroll on Instagram or whatever? Every one of these disciplines grows our capacity to deal with life on life's terms. In other words, I think as a society, we've become more interested with illusion rather than reality. We'd rather spend our lives in a digital fake world than in reality. I mean, how many young men, and I know I'm speaking to a lot of young men on this, like how many young men spend hours on video games instead of like living in real life, right? And all of this, what it causes is there's been an erosion. Like we're losing our ability to think. We're losing our ability to pay attention. I mean, when people are right in front of us, it's amazing. Like I'll walk into a room. I was sitting on with a group of people and it's like everyone's on their phone. We're losing our ability to reflect. And we know this about addiction. One of the big things that is talked about in addiction circles is just impulse control. The ability, like when you have a desire, like let's just make it really explicit. Like if you struggle with opioid abuse and your drug of choice was heroin, you have an impulse. You have a bodily impulse to want to take that substance, right? It literally, you can feel it in your body. And when we talk about impulse control, it's from the moment you feel the impulse, and oftentimes you're not even cognitively aware of it in your consciousness. It's just your body starts to react. You start to feel a certain way, and you start to make decisions and behaviors towards trying to alleviate that feeling. And so the ability to be aware of what the impulse is and how I'm feeling, and then make a cognitive decision. Like, why am I feeling this way? What is it that I want? What am I after? When we don't take time to think, if we're not paying attention to ourselves, if we don't know how to reflect anymore, then we're going to be in a world of trouble, especially if we struggle with addiction anyway, because there's not going to be any space between impulse and decision. There's not going to be enough space between impulse and behavior. And that's why we find ourselves doing things that we're like, I was doing good. How did I get here so fast? And it's because there's things like society is going so fast. There's a lot of factors at play against us right now that we've got to build our awareness. We've got to slow our body down, our mind down. And so the disciplines like prayer, meditative prayer, silent solitude, scripture reading, these things slow us down. They slow us down. They're hard because of that. Because many of us are addicted to this speed of life. That's why for some people, like in the refuge, the first couple phases are probably difficult. Well, they are. I've heard that they're difficult for some people simply because there's a lot of space. And when you have calm, you have to face yourself, and thoughts come up, and temptations come up, and memories come up. And often those can be painful memories and difficult thoughts. And so we can't tolerate that discomfort. So we try to run to something to make ourselves feel better. And oftentimes that's, food or television or video games or on down the line to things like drugs. And so the spiritual disciplines were meant to get us into a reflective posture, a thinking reflective. We're paying attention so that we can notice what's actually happening. And unfortunately, as a society, we've grown addicted to very high speed. In other words, we believe that fast is good and slow is bad.
Yeah.
Right? People work themselves to death. They don't sleep enough. We overdo everything. We overeat, we overwork, and we wonder why we're anxious. We wonder why we're tired. We wonder why we're depressed. And these disciplines are difficult because they are the medicine that we need, but they slow us down. They slow us down. Prayer, meditative prayer. What do I mean by meditative prayer? What I mean really simply is meditative prayer is more listening than it is speaking. And it's going before God in a listening posture and just being quiet. So I would say, from my layman's terms, really rough definition, the biggest difference between silence and meditative prayer would be, in meditative prayer, I am speaking, but I'm speaking much less words. Maybe I say something like, Lord, I'm here. Here I am. Hear my prayer. If there's something that you want to say, I'm going to listen. Meet me now in maybe you're feeling anxious. Meet me now in my anxiety.
Yeah, a good example of why that's important is it's really hard to have a conversation with someone. Like Actually, me interrupting you was a good example. Like, it's really hard to hear what God has to say if you're talking all the time.
Absolutely. And most of how we define prayer is us talking and God listening. And meditative prayer is mainly us listening. So if you're listening and you're like, I don't feel really confident at prayer. Well, this is great for you, because what this is it's getting into a room, or maybe you go on a walk, or getting into a place where this distraction is limited. You can quiet yourself, you can calm your body down, and you become aware of how you feel and what you're thinking, and you're inviting Jesus to meet you in that place, and you're inviting him to speak to you. And maybe you're new to this, and maybe that sounds weird. This doesn't need to be this weird, like, awkward thing. It's slowing down, and it's inviting God to work in your life, and you slowing down enough to listen. And I wonder, Austin, I think a lot of our stress, anxiety, so on and so forth, negative emotions, I'll just say negative emotions, is a byproduct for many of us of the fact that we don't slow down enough to really pay attention to what's happening in us. And we're going at such a fast pace that the fact that we feel anxious, the fact that we feel these negative emotions is an indicator. It's our body and mind and spirit trying to tell us, man, like, pay attention, slow down.
Something you mentioned was we do these things being like those spiritual disciplines of the silent solitude, reflective prayer, and scripture reading. We do those, you said we do those things so we can have a posture of reflection. And what that and the reflection means we have the space to think about those things that come up within us. And I believe there's a lot of fear in doing that, because we've all experienced that before, of like this overwhelming emotion, like, how do I handle it? Like, what you do in the face of fear is not a productive thing to do, is not to run from it, but it's about responding differently in fear, because fear is always going to be there. So we just have to learn how to be in it. And then what do we do when it's there? Because fear is telling us something really important. It's telling us that something is really important. So it's a very beneficial feeling. It's a beneficial emotion. Fear is a gift from God to us to help us learn more about ourselves, so we can learn more about him. And what I mean by that is, when we are afraid, there's like a series of questions that you can only kind of process when you slow down enough to be reflective. So if you think of something, it's like, what is it that I believe about this fear? Whatever the fear is about, or the anger, or whatever it is. What is it? What do I believe about it? And then so it's like 4 questions that you can ask yourself when you do have the time to reflect. Is it, what do I believe about this? And write it down. And then, what is actually true about this? What is actually true? Because sometimes the things we think we know aren't true, but we still think them. And then, why does it matter to me? And then, what do I want to do about it? So I think what we're talking about, Wes, what you're talking about is not, well, let's just slow down so we can just feel these really heavy things and then just, feel them. And then we'll get better. It's like, no, we have to do stuff about this. We have this information. Let's do something with it. And the reflective nature of these things, of these practices, are so we can better learn who we are. There's a David Benner, he's an author. I can't remember which book it is. that it's in, so I won't. It's God hides himself in the nooks and crannies of our soul. And the more we get to know who we are, the more he reveals who he is to us. So all of this is in service to getting to know him and realize how much he does love us. So it's not about us like going away. It's about it's about finding God in these different parts of who we are to better understand who we are, to better understand like how much we need him and how much he wants us. So this isn't like a selfish, self-centered practice. It's actually a empowering, like releasing of the things that are holding us captive and giving them to God so that we can better understand them.
Yeah, it reminds us what's true. This kind of prayer, it reminds us what is real. It goes back to, we're so inundated with illusion, like social media, it's a version of the world, but it gives us a version of the world that is monitored and distributed through a specific, like for example, if you're looking at Instagram, it's monitored and filtered through a specific tool that is made by people with an agenda. It's an illusion of what the world is. Like this kind of spiritual discipline, it brings us back to that which is actually real. Who am I? Who is God? How do I feel? What do I think? I mean, the questions you asked a minute ago, that takes us slowing down and asking those questions. I remember we were in staff meeting the other day at the refuge, and a staff member said, man, I hate these reflective questions. I find it hard. Why do we find it hard? Because not many of us slow down enough to ask ourselves these types of questions. What do I believe about this? What's actually true? Why does it matter to me? What do I want to do about it? That what you just unpacked a minute ago, those 4 questions, that is in a sense impulse control, because I'm stopping to ask myself, what do I believe? So if I have an impulse to shoot heroin, what if I stopped and I said, what do I actually believe about shooting heroin? Well, I've overdosed a couple times, so I believe that I could die, that this isn't good for me. What's actually true? It's not good for me. Why does it matter to me? Well, it helped me. It helped me feel good in some of my worst moments. It helped me not feel the emotional pain I was experiencing. But what do I want to do about it? I think I actually don't want to use it because it led me feeling very, very sick, very lost, very alone. See, just stopping to ask yourself those questions, that is impulse control. But we have to realize that many of us have conditioned ourselves to not stop and think in that way. And that's one of the things that prayer helps us do, is slow down, come before the Lord, reflect, talk to God. Lord, I'm struggling with this impulse to do something that I know is not good. And I'm going to sit here in quiet, and I'm going to ask that you would comfort me. You would be with me. Psalm 61 says, hear my cry, O God, listen to my prayer. From the end of the earth, I call to you when my heart is faint. Lead me to the rock that is higher than I, for you have been my refuge, a strong tower against my enemy. I love the Psalms because it gives us so much language. If you don't know what to pray or what to say, just open up the Bible to Psalms. If you open up the Bible just open it up in the middle, you're probably going to be close to Psalms, but just these prayers, these songs to God. My heart is faint. Lead me to where I can find respite and refuge. This is what we all need. And Jesus says in Matthew 21, ask whatever you ask in prayer and you will receive if you have faith. Which may sound confusing, like, is God going to give me whatever I want? Well, maybe, maybe not. But at the end of the day, he's inviting us to ask him for what we need. He's inviting us to have faith, which means things will feel uncertain at times. But he's inviting us to ask. He's inviting us to show up. And so for anyone listening that maybe prayer has been confusing, what's the importance of prayer? You asked that question earlier, Austin, which I think is good. Why do we do this? It's because we often would rather live in an illusion than reality. We need to be brought back to reality. Prayer does that because we are made by God and we are made for God. And prayer reminds us of that. And it brings us back to what we need most. Like even that Benner quote, like, I need to be in tune with myself to be able to really experience who I am, to know who God is. And if I don't slow down, I'm not going to experience that. Prayer helps us slow down. It reminds us of who God is and who we are. You know, when troubling things happen in our lives, we often speed up, we react, we think we have to move fast. But prayer slows us down and reminds us that, oh, there's a God who loves me more than I love myself. There's a God who's existed before I was ever born. There's a God who will exist when I'm no longer here. Maybe I should slow down and present myself before this God, and maybe he has something he'd want to say to me.
Yeah. And I think if it highlights, if you're hearing these things that you just talked about, Wes, and your instant reaction is like, that's dumb, I don't want to do that. Ask yourself why. Why don't you want to do that? Why is it a waste of time? Like, what is wrong? Or if you care about someone, I don't know of something that can say more clearly that you care about them than just being in their presence, sitting next to them, being with them, hanging out with them, not doing anything, not having like we have to have a task in order to do something. It's just, I care about you so much. I just like being with you. So I think you should, if you're a Christian, I'm speaking specifically to Christians, if you find it a waste of time to sit and be in silence and just be with God without a measurable purpose, without a measurable, like, I have to do these things, I have to ask these things, I think that might highlight some of the issues in your other relationships, because that's not how God works. God just likes being with us. So if you're like put off or repulsed by this, take a look at how that has probably seeped into other relationships in your life.
That's good. So in closing, just give an example of a practice you could do if this is all new to you and you're like the person Austin mentioned who's like, this is dumb, I'm not going to do it. But try it. And something you might want to do is grab a notebook and a pen and maybe even a Bible and go to a place where you're not going to be distracted and you can be quiet. Set a timer for 5 minutes. You know, if you want to be really ambitious, maybe you do 10 minutes. And start the timer and just sit. Or walk. Maybe you go on a walk with your notebook. But just go on a walk or sit. And your mind will wander. And if you notice memories or thoughts that seem pretty significant, just write it down. Just write it down quickly. And then move on. And then if you have another one, write it down quickly and move on. But just continue to invite the Lord. Lord, I'm here. Just invite you to speak to me or do whatever you want. And as these thoughts come up, write them down. And then after the timer goes off, read over some of the things you wrote down, and maybe what you can also do is pray over those things and invite God to meet you in those moments. Maybe you're afraid about a family member or something you did in the past. Maybe you're reminded of something that happened in your childhood. Maybe you're worried about what's next for you, or you have a decision coming up. Write those things down in that quiet moment. And then after the timer goes off, maybe you pray, God, be with me in this decision I have to make. I just noticed I've been frustrated the last couple of days, and it's really about this thing, because this thing keeps coming up. I just give it to you, and I pray that you be with me. And it's in the quiet. The point I'm trying to make is, in the quiet, I think some of our struggles really come to light, and you can write them down, and then you could pray about it. But that's it. That's the whole exercise. And I'd be really interested how you felt before you did it and how you feel after, because there's something about creating space, if you're really not used to it, could create some anxiety. But for many people, it can be relaxing. And it can be a reminder of truth. So this is something you could do by yourself. It's something you could do with someone else. But it's good for your brain. It's good for your soul to slow down. And so I encourage people listening to play with this. Maybe give it a try. Because I think slowing down and creating margin and creating space for yourself is a good practice for you. It's a good practice for all of us to become more whole and more healthy human beings. So that's my last thought, Austin. Is there anything else you want to say before we wrap up?
I think I want to reiterate that this can be stressful, and it's hard work, because the stuff that's going to be pulled out are often the things that we don't want to deal with or are difficult for us to deal with. But just so this is difficult, but it is important work. And it'll help add clarity to who we are and how we experience love, how we give love, and most importantly, how we experience God's love. So this is it is hard, but it is important, valuable work. And the only person who can choose to do that is you. But it's definitely worth it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Relational Recovery Podcast. We'll be back soon with a new conversation. We'll see you then.